Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling the dynamic world of cryptocurrency policy and really zooming in on the current state of XRP.
Right.
You're here, I imagine, to get a clear and comprehensive understanding of this, let's face it, often complex space.
Yeah, it definitely can be.
And that's exactly what we're aiming for, sort of cutting through the noise to bring you the essential insights.
And for this deep dive, we've pulled together quite a range of sources. Think of it like assembling, different pieces of a puzzle.
Okay.
We've got Grant Thornton's outlook on 2025 crypto policy, K&L Gates on regulatory jurisdictions, the Motley Fool and TradingView News looking at XRP investment potential, Shepard Mullen on DOJ enforcement, a Politico piece on that rejected Senate crypto bill.
Right, that was recent.
News from Decrypt about a healthcare firm actually using XRP, and even an analyst's take from TradingView News on XRP's, the future role.
So quite a mix.
It is. And our mission really is to weave these threads together, spotlight the critical developments, and clarify what they might mean, without completely overwhelming you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Maybe start with that overarching theme.
Yeah.
The shifting regulatory landscape here in the U.S.
Yeah, sounds good.
The Grant Thornton report seems to paint a picture of, a notable change in approach, potentially under the second Trump administration.
Well, what's really interesting right off the bat is the report mentioning an executive order, one declaring crypto a national priority.
Wow, okay. A national priority.
Yeah, that really signals a fundamental elevation of digital assets on the government's agenda. It suggests a move towards maybe a more favorable environment.
And this potential shift in attitude seems to be showing up in what Grant Thornton calls a pivot to light touch regulation. They talk about a reported slowdown in some SEC enforcement actions and maybe potential appointments like Paul Atkins at the SEC, Brian Quintenz at the CFTC, people seen as more crypto-friendly.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, these potential appointments, plus the SEC's reported internal talks through their crypto task force about reevaluating their approach, it does suggest a possible evolution.
Away from maybe the more aggressive stance we've seen.
Potentially, yeah. Grant Thornton points out the task force is looking at things like streamlining registration paths, think Regulation A, crowdfunding.
Ways for projects to raise money legally.
Right. And considering relief for coin offerings, re-examining the whole framework, even their comments on meme coins, hinting they might not always be investment contracts, points towards this possibly evolving perspective.
That does sound like a pretty significant potential change in the air. And it's not just the SEC, right?
Yeah.
The Department of Justice, DOJ, also seems to be recalibrating. Shepard Mullen covered this.
Yes, and what really stands out in the DOJ's announced shift is the reported narrowing of their enforcement focus.
How so?
They're now seemingly prioritizing cases against individuals who, intentionally cause financial harm or use crypto for clearly criminal stuff.
Yeah.
And importantly, they're reportedly discouraging prosecutions for what might just be regulatory violations, unless there's clear proof of willful intent.
Right. And crucially, they're also reportedly hesitant to bring cases just based on whether something's a security or commodity without getting high-level approval first. Plus, it sounds like platforms won't be targeted for user actions unless they're knowingly helping criminals.
Yeah.
That feels like a move away from regulation by enforcement.
Exactly. This reported policy shift from the DOJ, if it aligns with a more pro-crypto executive view, could offer, maybe a bit more clarity for platforms and developers, meaning good faith efforts to comply that maybe have minor mistakes are potentially less likely to end up as criminal charges. But, the big question is, how will they define and prove willful intent?
Yeah, that's key. Definitely something to watch.
For sure.
So we've got potential shifts in the executive branch, regulatory bodies. What about Congress? Grant Thornton mentioned stablecoin legislation, and Politico covered that Senate vote.
Yeah, the stablecoin push is definitely significant. Grant Thornton highlights the Stable Act and the Genius Act.
Right, those have been around in some form before.
They have, yeah. Bipartisan support in the last Congress, revised versions now. The basic goal is to create a clear framework for stablecoins.
Which are used for, all sorts of things now. Cross-border payments, trading.
As a store of value within crypto, exactly. And right now, they're mostly under state rules, which is messy.
A patchwork, yeah.
Yeah.
Creates headaches for compliance.
Totally. So the industry is hoping for streamlined federal oversight.
Makes sense.
And these acts try to do that. They define payment stablecoins pegged to fiat, segregated reserves, and say who can issue them. Banks, maybe non-banks via the OCC.
The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, a federal regulator.
Right, and they'd require monthly proof of reserves. But, like Grant Thornton notes, having the OCC oversee non-banks, that could cause some friction with state regulators.
Ah, yeah. The classic state versus federal tension. That's definitely something to watch.
Perhaps.
Okay, now shifting to that Senate vote Politico wrote about. Sounds like GOP-led crypto legislation hit a wall.
It did, yeah. The vote was close 48-4-49 against proceeding. It really shows how tough it is to get broad agreement on crypto laws.
Even if it had some bipartisan support earlier.
Right. But Democratic concerns ultimately blocked it for now. Senator Warren mentioned things like not enough time for review, but also potential issues in the bill itself.
Like what?
Things like corruption risks, national security worries, consumer protection, economic stability, kind of the big picture concerns.
And Senator Haggerty on the Republican side called it a vote to kill the crypto industry. So, pretty stark disagreement there.
Very stark. It seems like even though some Democrats do want to deal on crypto, this specific bill just faced too many roadblocks at this time.
So progress beyond stablecoins seems challenging.
It does. Crafting comprehensive laws that go beyond stablecoins is complex. You know, that whole market structure issue defining what's a security versus a commodity for everything else.
Yeah, the big one.
That's still a really intricate, heavily debated topic. The Financial Innovation and Technology Act, mentioned by Grant Thornton, was one past attempt to tackle it.
Okay, so we've got this evolving regulatory legislative picture. Now let's really focus on XRP. How does it fit into all this? We've got insights from the Motley Fool Decrypt TradingView News. Grant Thornton again.
Right, let's kick off with potential catalysts. The Motley Fool pointed out a few things leading up to June 2025.
Like what?
Well, one big one is the possibility of the SEC approving a spot XRP ETF, an exchange-traded fund.
Like the Bitcoin ETFs.
Exactly. They mentioned June 17th as a potential date for a Franklin Templeton application. They compare it to Bitcoin's ETF approval, which was huge, but also note Ether ETFs launched with maybe less impact.
Interesting. And there are multiple applications for XRP ETFs?
Reportedly at least 7, yeah. So that's definitely something people are watching closely.
For sure. What else did Motley Fool mention?
The FOMC meeting in June, the Federal Open Market Committee, potential interest rate cuts.
And historically, lower rates can be good for altcoins like XRP.
Generally, yeah. Makes riskier assets potentially more attractive to investors. It's a historical trend. Anyway.
Got it. And the third thing?
The XRPLAPEX Developer Conference. It's in Singapore, June 10th to 12th.
Okay. Industry events often see big announcements.
Exactly. The agenda apparently includes things like AI, cross-chain interoperability, getting blockchains to talk to each other.
DeFi, real-world asset tokenization, all hot topics.
Pretty much. Any big news there could obviously impact XRP.
That's a lot potentially happening just in June.
Uh-huh.
Then there's that Decrypt story about Wellgistics Health, a healthcare company using XRP.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. A publicly traded company actually embracing XRP. Seems quite tangible.
Also using it.
Well, they reportedly plan to accept it for payments, add it to their corporate treasury using a pretty large equity line, like $50 million.
Wow.
And even use it to back credit lines for pharmacies and pay global vendors.
So really integrating it into their operations.
It seems so. It shows a real-world application for streamlining payments, maybe cutting costs in healthcare. It's, one thing to talk about use cases, another to see a public company actually do it.
That is a powerful example, seeing practical value. Now, that TradingView News perspective, the analyst Pumpius, that sounds a bit different, more unconventional.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a much more far-reaching vision for XRP.
What's the core idea?
Well, what's really intriguing is this assertion of a coming financial reset. And in this reset, owning XRP isn't just speculative, it's almost like a citizenship paper in a new financial system.
Citizenship paper, that's strong language.
It is. The view emphasizes XRP's tech infrastructure, not just its price. And it makes claims of big institutional interest testing by the BIS, World Bank, IMF,
Right.
RippleNet's central bank partnerships, though honestly the details are often pretty vague or indirect.
Right, so the idea is that maybe people holding traditional assets or even other cryptos could get left behind in this silent transition through protocol updates.
That's the narrative presented, yeah. But it's really important for you, the listener, to recognize this is highly speculative.
Okay. Concrete proof is maybe lacking.
It's often elusive, yes. While it's a captivating narrative, especially in some XRP circles, there's no verifiable confirmation from these big institutions about XRP being central to some future global system. It's a perspective to consider cautiously.
Got it. Definitely needs a grain of salt. Okay, circling back to regulation for XRP specifically. Grant Thornton mentioned the SEC case against Ripple Labs.
Right, the ongoing enforcement action started way back in 2020. The allegation is that Ripple's initial XRP offering was an unregistered securities offering.
And this case, as K&L Gates also pointed out, is pretty pivotal for SEC jurisdiction over crypto in general.
Hugely significant. The final outcome, whether XRP is legally deemed a security or not, will provide a lot more clarity for the whole market on how digital assets fit under securities law.
And the fact that it's still ongoing just highlights that persistent regulatory uncertainty around XRP.
Absolutely. It's still hanging over things.
And just to add another piece, XRP News today mentioned CME launching XRP futures, scheduled for May 19th.
Yeah, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. That means more access for institutional investors, potentially influencing market dynamics too.
Right. And finally, Motley Fool also talked about Ripple's potential in cross-border payments, that huge market.
Yes, trillions of dollars annually. Their point is, even capturing a small slice of that could significantly boost XRP network volume.
But they also mentioned risks, right?
Definitely. Lack of widespread adoption by major banks for these payments, and of course the ongoing SEC legal battle, those are still significant hurdles.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We're seeing a U.S. regulatory scene that might be leaning towards a lighter touch, maybe driven from the top.
But actual laws, beyond stablecoins, are still facing big challenges in Congress.
And the DOJ seems to be narrowing its enforcement focus to really intentional wrongdoing. Then for XRP specifically, you've got potential catalysts like ETFs, the conference, plus real-world adoption examples like Logistics.
But also the shadow of that SEC case, and these really different, almost conflicting views on what XRP's fundamental role even is, from regulated asset to financial reset linchpin.
So it creates both significant opportunity and, well, considerable uncertainty.
Absolutely, and it's so vital to remember this is just a snapshot. May 9th, 2025, this whole landscape is incredibly fluid.
Things change fast.
Regulations evolve, markets shift, unexpected things happen all the time.
So maybe if a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given these really contrasting takes on XRP's status and future, from navigating existing laws to being part of some fundamental financial shift, what do you think will ultimately shape the future of crypto more? Centralized government regulation or the force of decentralized real-world adoption?
That's a great question.
Definitely something worth pondering and exploring further on your own. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.